Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Random Drop. And this week I want to talk about Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. These two have been in conversations for quite a while now, especially with 16 being the most recent mainline release, and then 7 Rebirth coming out very recently to massive praise. And it's leading to a lot of conversations of, hey, what's a real Final Fantasy? What do you want to see in the future of other Final Fantasies? Do I want this or that? Or 16 should have done this, or I wish 7 Rebirth did this instead or did that, or I can't get into this game for this reason and I can't get into that game for that reason. It's leading to a bunch of crossfire and some people trying to sound like they're bringing each other down and kind of like sort of infighting in the series, which has always been a thing. The thing about the Final Fantasy series is that each game is so damn different that one can be your favorite while a different person can have a wildly different one. Like, I personally do not like 8 in any way, but Final Fantasy IX is just emblazoned into my memory as this incredible thing, even knowing it has a lot of issues. So the idea of this video is to kind of compare and contrast, look at 3 main subjects, which is the story of the game loop, and the world design, and compare and contrast the two across each other. This is more of a like constructive feedback session, right? It's not to like fight or tear down either other game, but it's to kind of have that discussion and have that like honest look at the franchise as a whole and see what maybe we can glean out what the next one might be like. So without further ado, let's get into Final Fantasy XVI versus 7 Rebirth. Let's get into it.
Hey everybody, before we get started, I just wanted to say if you enjoy our content and want to stay up to date with our videos, hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Thanks. So on to the video.
So as I said in the start of the video, the main way I'm going to construct this video is to compare the games on 3 different points: the story, the gameplay loop, and the world design. The 3 defining characteristics I think there are for Final Fantasy games in general. Those are usually the things that vary wildly, and let's have that discussion. So, story. Final Fantasy XVI was the first mature game in the Final Fantasy mainline series, with the long history games of some being E, and a lot of them being T for teen, and none really ever crossing into that mature threshold. I think Type 0 is one of the games that does actually cross into that threshold. And if you've never played Type 0, it has a lot of issues as it's a portable game thrown onto a console. It has a lot of ideas, and even though I wouldn't say the story is great, but that feeling of just the awfulness of war and fighting and the cost of it is all in that game, and it's something that to take a look at. And it's like one of the first entries into like real-time action with different varied characters that all play very uniquely in different ways. And you can see where a lot of the advancements in gameplay in the other parts of the series came from. But as I was saying, Final Fantasy XVI has a much darker tone compared to anything in the series. People bleed, die, say fuck, talk about sex, or even insinuate it. It's not to like Game of Thrones level that like people feared, where like they're gonna show a titty every 5 seconds or something like that. No, it's actually pretty damn tame. It's just that Clive says fuck a lot, actually. And there's just really adult themes that are not outright spelled out, but you can infer what happened to these characters in the environment they're in, right? It has a dark undertone where they don't dive straight deep into it, but that feeling is there of like, man, this character probably went through some shit. It does have some lighter moments between characters, right? Clive originally, people were so scared that he was like some crazy edgelord and just gonna be a nothing character. But the strength with 16 is that it is focused on Clive, and you get to see his journey from where he's like a starry-eyed teenager to the end where he's middle-aged at this point and lived out a whole life. And this journey follows him throughout that, and how the people he's met affect him along the way. Clive is probably, if not the most kind-hearted Final Fantasy protagonist in the whole series. At the start, he kind of starts like a little bit of a dick, but that kindness was always layered underneath, but the world just beat him down, and just, I mean, his life was destroyed and he just lived for vengeance. The events of the game and meeting Jill, meeting Sid, bring him back from the depths, and you get to watch that journey in a world where Clive should be the most cynical, dark, edgy motherfucker in the world. He does what Final Fantasy characters do. He inspires hope. He is the warrior of light in the 16 world. Then we move on to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is the first actual real part of Final Fantasy VII, as the Midgard portion really is just like the start of the original game. And it's just there to quickly introduce you to the characters and like, hey, this is the premise and what's going on. This is why Shinra is so bad and whatnot. The initial game really built out Midgard as a place, but it's a place that we're not going to go back to for a very long time. And most people's memories of 7 is this part of the journey of when you leave Midgard to the inevitable end. So 7 Rebirth in itself is very party focused compared to 16, which focuses on one character and living throughout his life. 7 Rebirth focuses on this cast that you mostly met in Remake and doubles down on that and follows them further. It spends more time with them. Events do happen, right? But it's a small part of a much larger story. And when you get out of Rebirth, is just that sense of journey of following these characters across the world as they solve some arcs like Barrett's arc and Red 13's arc, and mysteries and questions start being asked that aren't going to be really answered until the very end of the game. But the bond between these characters you can see building out as you're doing side quests and Ubisoft Zone tower gathering and the main story quest, which is the incredible highlight of this game. It's all more built out and fleshed out. And the reason this works is that this is the second part of a trilogy. This is the part of the game where stakes can be lower, right? We can take time to like help a children's book author or whatnot, or get into some hijinks with Red 13, go to a side quest where you're like guiding a chicken across the road back to some lady's roost thing so she can cook them for you later, right? The goofiness can happen because when you're on a road trip, just wild shit and weird shit is gonna happen. You're gonna meet all sorts of people, and you and your buddies are gonna get into all sorts of stuff. And that's what Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for the vast majority feels like. Because, as we all know, the third act of Final Fantasy VII is a lot darker, and it would be really weird for these types of side quests to show up in the next game. I really wonder how they're gonna do that game tonally, as the tone of this game isn't going to really work. The stakes for Final Fantasy VII, the third act, are so much higher, and it would be really weird if we're just kind of doing the same type of side quests and side events and mini games. And where I land when I put these two stories versus each other, they're entirely incomparable in terms of story and quality. Both of these stories make me feel very different things inside for very different reasons. But we can talk about how the game is designed affects the story in the long run. I would honestly say the way the open world is designed in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth completely kills all pacing in the story. But the plus side, with so many side objectives, side events, and things to do and map things to fill out, you get to spend a bit more time with these characters and you dive deeper into those relationships compared to 16, where it's telling a more technically better story and more connected and cohesive and well paced. But sadly, there are points where it feels you wanting. So like for me personally, I would have loved like 2 or 3 more side quests with Jill, Dion, and Joshua to just hang out with them a bit more and get to know them a little bit better when everything isn't just so serious, right? And I understand the stakes of 16 are very high, but I feel like just a quirky quest with Joshua or Jill or even Dion here or there could have done a lot for the game, honestly. And even just removing some of the really more fillerish side quests during the game and just expanding on some of the characters a bit more. The thing about 7, right, is celebrating the original game, so they know you love these characters. So we would gladly do whatever these characters ask us and spend more time with them. 16 is a new game. People, they're not gonna know if you're gonna like Dion or Joshua or Jill or Gav or Karen, right? It's a very much unknown. So each one is given pretty much like the same amount of side quest content and not really doubling down on anyone. I bet if like the team had the data they had now, they would give you Joshua side quests, Dion side quests, Jill chapters, and just double down on that stuff. But sadly, just that's not the world we live in. In regards to the story for the future of the franchise, I really have no demands here. Really, my only expectation is that the team is confident in the story they're telling. Lots of people have ton of varying opinions on like tone and how goofy things should be or how serious things should be and what pulls some people out and what doesn't, right? Everyone is gonna have their different barometer, right? It's just how we're built as humans. We're all gonna have different tastes, and Final Fantasy series, as you know, can vary wildly because they try tons of different shit out tonally. We have been back and forward at this point, from complete whimsy to complete serious at this point. So we've seen it all, and you're gonna like whatever part you like depending on where you were in life and how it affected you at that time. So to be like, hey, no man, we need a lot more goofiness in this Final Fantasy series, or no, it has to be completely serious. There's no real right answer. The real right answer is get a writer who is completely and incredibly confident in the vision they're trying to put out and support it wholeheartedly. Ishikawa! 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 As long as the work is well told, animated, and voice acted, I'm ready to fall in love with any new entry to the franchise. It's okay for characters to say fuck and for chocobos to bleed. Fuck. Shit. Damn it. And it's okay for some weird koala thing to sell me items and for a dog in a guard outfit to do the Michael Jackson dance. It's all Final Fantasy at this point. Just be confident in the story you're telling. So the next part I want to compare is the game loop. If you don't understand, the game loop is the basic structure of the game. So in 16, for example, you do main story quests, then side quests through action combat and battle hunts that give you more AP and abilities and points to spec out your current icons and abilities and grow your character further and progress the story, right? It is the thing you're doing consistently throughout the game. In 7 Remake, you're doing main story quests and side quests and filling out the map, gathering towers, scanning rocks and whatnot, and doing mini games to progress your player power, right? You're getting weapons and abilities and materials from side activities that all feed into your power in combat, which you use to progress through the story or fight even more challenging enemies. And as for Final Fantasy XVI, Final Fantasy XVI is an incredible action game in its own right. It is some of the smoothest gameplay you will ever have or feel, and it's some of the best looking out there. With again, highs so high that they are actually probably, if not the best, some of the best in gaming. If you've played this game and have gone through the Bahamut fight, through the Titan fight, through the final fight, through the Omega fight, all that stuff is due to how just much of a fucking spectacle this game is, and part of it is because of that action combat and how well it plays as well. You're not only looking at a movie, you feel like this incredible fantasy playing through it. But sadly, in its development, they pulled back a little bit too much on the RPG mechanics. Just a few additions would have been fine, keeping the action focus, but giving us a little bit more character customization and build customization and commanding party members like Torgal and Jill with just a few attacks and button presses. I don't need to completely control them, but to have them feel like they are with me and part of the party. You do get a button for Torgal, but it's more for like combo extenders. He feels like a tool and not a party member. And Jill will like attack and animate, but she kind of feels very useless compared to something like Dragon's Dogma 2, where you have completely AI party members that heal you, buff you, debuff you, and clear cleanses and do crazy attacks all on their own. You just assign 4 abilities to give them and they'll figure it out, right? But they feel part of the party, meanwhile keeping the incredible action combat. You can have both worlds, you can still do it, but you still have to design around it, right? And the thing with 16 is it just pulled it back too far. There are no weaknesses in the game. There are no debuffs and buffs for you as a character, so you don't really need anyone else. You're so self-sufficient and completely busted with all the icon powers and abilities that really everyone else is just window dressing. And I think we could still again keep that incredible combat but still have some RPG mechanics layered about, right? It doesn't need to be as deep as 7 Rebirth, because that thing goes freaking deep. But a couple more layers, and I think 16 would have been a lot more appreciated, because everything in the game currently seems super superficial. Levels and weapon upgrades and accessories, they just don't feel like they changed the character much. Clive feels like Clive, and the only difference is what abilities you're picking. And this hurts the overall exploration loop of the game, as quest rewards and EXP feel meaningless, as they don't really increase or change your character in any way. They're just kind of a flat number that goes up. So you're less incentivized to explore every little nook and cranny of the map, and to even do side quests. The only thing that brings you to do side quests is so you can get more story and lore and reputation in the game, so you can learn more about the world. And you'll do hunts for the slight, you know, weapon upgrade and whatnot, or item upgrade. But again, they're very superficial. And adding some more RPG mechanics would make people actually happy to do mundane side quests, because they're getting something out of it. 7 Rebirth is a perfect proof of that. People will do absolutely anything to increase player power. Absolutely anything. Then we move to 7 Rebirth, which is about 60% of the way, all the way to action combat, right? Let's compare turn-based to action combat. And 7's like kind of right here, where this is 16 right here, where it's completely free-flowing. You can animation cancel, and it's some of the best action combat, and it's real action combat, right? 7 Rebirth is right here, where I know that the ATB system and the action RPG system in 7 Rebirth is like the first for a lot of people, but honestly the 7 battle system is just a much better version of the Tales series. The Tales series has a stagger system and a weakness system and a character swapping system. Shit, that game even has multiplayer. The only thing it doesn't have is the ATB command system and the slowdown effects. But if you ever play a Tales game, you could start seeing similarities where you'll break a guard and eventually it'll stagger the enemy, and you unleash crazy combos on it as it's kind of like stun locked. Again, the 7 Rebirth and the Tales series are very close into like what they're trying to achieve, but I would very much argue that the 7 Rebirth series does it much better, and the ATB system and how it's implemented is an innovation in action RPG combat, but it's still not true action, as the game still has to feel like an RPG, and that's where some of the disconnects come from. As the game still has tons of animation lock and stun locking and clunky dodging and blocking, because it can't be perfect. You have to take damage in this game. Things are going to auto track you and hit you without a telegraph in this game, because it still has to be designed about you taking damage and healing it up, or buffing yourself and equipping items to reduce damage, right? Because that is one of the defining things about like the turn-based system in general, right? It was always a management of your life bar. And so they kind of brought that over with 7 Rebirth, as most fights when you're playing them, you realize, and everyone will realize, you're constantly getting whittled down. There's very few attacks that will outright kill you, or you feel the need to dodge. And those, they will telegraph very hardly that you need to get out of the way or dodge or block it. But most of the time, there's just these little things constantly hitting you, and your health bars are constantly draining, and then you either have a plan or you don't to re-heal yourself and continue the battle, right? But it is still not a true action combat system. It is a merging of the two, but it still feels not great at points. It's just like almost there. As like 16 is probably a bit too far and just needed a couple more action RPG things. This is slightly too far and needed a couple more action things, or pull some things back, as 7 Rebirth is crazy complicated. If you show this game to anyone that isn't us, or even they've played, like I have friends who played the original 7 and see the combat of Rebirth and just like, I fucking don't want to do this, right? It's just, there's many layers, and they're gamers, they play tons of games, but there's a certain layer where you hit a certain point where you're like, all right, so if you want to hit an air enemy, you have to dodge roll and hit square with this character, and then when you hold block and then triangle and circle will do different abilities depending on what different characters you have in your party at the time and what talent trees you put into. But then you have the ATB system, but you can also, like, there's just layers and layers and layers that most people would just look at and be like, fuck off. The reason 7 Rebirth gets away with this is because it's the second game in the series. So they took the first combat system, slapped some shit on top of it, fixed some things here and there, but overall it's the same system, added some more characters. So man, this motherfucker's beefy, dude. It is so goddamn beefy. But to have this expectation that, all right, well, every game in the future needs to be like this is fucking crazy and out of your mind. It needs to be towards this direction for sure. I think the ATB system should just be a given in the next game. Imagine if Clive had an ATB that he could build up while he was doing his combos, and he fucking calls Jill in for an assist, or Torgal or something, right? People would have just been like, oh, that's so good. They would have loved that shit. One of the most hyped scenes in 16 is when you're attacking the Garuda boss and fucking Torgal comes around the side and bites her in the face and does like a grapple move. It is so cool. What if you could do that in combat? I think 16's system would work in itself if it much better, or people would overall, fans would love 16's combat system more better and wouldn't be so divisive. Just adding the ATB system and tweaking it, of course, to make it work better and feel like more like an RPG. But it's not like this massive change, and it would have added a lot more flavor to the game, I feel like. And I think that's 7 Rebirth's greatest strength, that it showed us where, hey, you want to take action RPG combat to its absolute extreme? Oh, here it is, right? It is the merging of turn-based and action combat to its like prime form, and it's crazy complicated and depth and material systems and dual techs and all this stuff. And we really needed this. I think we all really needed to see this, but this is not how. This expectation of the rest of the games being like this is just not feasible, and only works because this is the second iteration of a combat system. The first game, it took them forever to figure out what the game was even going to play like, to where it led to 7 Remake 1 being pretty much a completely linear game with really bad side quests and bad backtracking and repeating using areas, literally doing a main quest and a side quest in the same spots in certain hallways, right? So that's a really long way of saying I really like 7 Rebirth's combat and systems and ATB system, and I really like 16's combat. But they're both a bit too far in either direction, I feel, and we're just almost there. I feel like 17's gonna be incredible because if you're smart, you would look at both of these games and see what worked out for both of them and try to find a middle ground, a melding of the two. And I'm really excited for what's gonna come next. Combat carries these games in their overall loop. While you may have issues with one or the other, it's an undeniable fact. You wouldn't be doing anything these developers would be asking you to do if the game just didn't play so damn well. No matter how good the story is, and no matter how good the rewards. And in the future, I believe the answer lies in between these two games. And I would personally give up some of 7 Rebirth's combat bloat for a smoother gameplay experience, which 16 nails. Jumps, dodges, blocking, and stun locking, and enemy attack telegraphs feel really rough in Rebirth, and you have to be honest about it. It only works because it's a action JRPG combat system. Again, like the Tales series. Go play that series and you'll see very similar things of stun locking characters mid-attack and whatnot. They're very similar. And the best example of probably what I have in my head is actually a game that came out very recently. Go look at Granblue Fantasy Relink. There in that game, you control a central character, but you're still kitting out a party of 4 throughout your journey and adventure, assigning what abilities the AI is going to have and upgrading their equipment and talent trees, while still having some really incredible controls like 16's action combat. Blocking, dodging, parrying feel incredible in that game. And that game still has multiple characters that all play vastly differently, but the core of how the game feels and performs just feels so goddamn smooth still. Meanwhile, still retaining things like buffs, debuffs, and keeping the whole core of what RPGs feel like when they're designed correctly. All it would need at that point is slap an ATB system, and if you want character switching, I feel like it's not necessary with an ATB system, but hey, might as well if you want. It's completely the developer's choice at that point, but the ATB system I feel like is a must. Slap those bad boys on there, man, and we have a masterpiece. One of the greatest of all time at that point, undeniable. And again, if you haven't played Granblue Fantasy Relink, I wholeheartedly recommend it. It is a very short journey. It's kind of like a sample of like where these games can go in the future in a lot of ways. And it's a really interesting thing to think about. And it makes me excited for when Granblue eventually puts out a full-ass RPG game with the systems they've built in this one. So world design. right? This is how you traverse the world the game has put you in and what you're doing in it, really. Final Fantasy XVI in itself is a hub world where everything starts at a central point, and depending on the mission you're going on, you're either going to the forest area, desert area, for example, snow area, holy area, whatnot, right? There's multiple areas you can go to, and you'll be revisiting them throughout your journey, depending on the change of the world state or side quests, and new areas will unlock because you did a main story quest. There'll be separate points you're constantly hitting. These zones are more like towards Final Fantasy XII, probably a bit smaller. If you ever played Yoshi P's games, you know he's very, very good at not wasting money and wasting production time and developer time and getting you exactly how much you need. So a lot of these zones are, hey, if you would explore a part of the zone and there's nothing in it for you to do, you can assure a side quest is probably going to take you there at some point. But these zones are about as big as they need to be for you to get the feeling of like this massive world that is Valisthea. There's big vistas and incredible overlooks, and they still feel like you're going through a place overall, but they're slightly smaller than I would like. Again, I would have liked 16 to kind of go more towards the 12 route. There's just a bit more wider areas. There's quite a bit of wide areas in 16, but there just need to be, like, I would say the game probably needed just 20 to 30% more landmass. Maybe 30% more landmass, and I think the overall size of the game and areas you can explore and do hunts would have felt nearly damn perfect. While Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a story progression based open world, meaning you will unlock massive maps depending on how far you're in the story. I think it's like Grand Theft Auto 3 that did this, where eventually you do the main story and the next part of the island unlocks, and it's just another huge portion of the city. I think Grand Theft Auto is more just outright open now, but back in the day, that's how it used to progress. And that's probably the closest example I can get for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because most games don't fucking do this. Most games don't make 5 to 6 different biomes filled with quests and icons on the map and so forth. Like 2 of these zones could be a whole video game on their own. But we got so much more than that. It's a massive, massive, massive game. And then eventually when you're near the end, you realize that there's actually no load screen between them. And you can actually freely travel between all the areas. So it just makes the world fully realized in a lot of ways. But it is a game where you're doing these massive zones. You go through the calm area, right? Do the story quests there, and there's like 3 story quests in like each area. Main story quests, they're very sparse because usually the main story is kind of done in its own area and an environment. It never really uses the open world in any way. The open world is just there for you to do side quests and explore and find towers, right? It's there for filler content, and a lot of it, pacing wise, is not needed. That's really my main issue with it, is pacing can vary wildly depending on what type of person you are. I am the type of person who, when I get to a boss fight, I want to be as powerful as I can possibly be. So naturally, I get to a zone and here's the next story quest to move forward, and I ignore it for 10 to 12 hours because I'm running around the map doing tedious bullshit that I actually don't think is fun, but I am doing it because it make number go up and make the brain chemicals feel good when number go up and I get new materia and new materia slots. It is very much that Ubisoft effect, and done much better, right? Because everything you do feeds back into the power system. Compared to Final Fantasy XVI, everything feels rewarding to do. And it's mainly my broken brain is the reason I did it all. But I also realized for development and future games that like we really can't do this again. It's like a waste of resources. Like we really don't need the game to be this fucking big. This game, it works because it is Final Fantasy VII and people have expectations. And everyone remembers Cosmo Canyon and the different zones, even though there were flat barren wastelands with nothing in between. But hey, people have the expectation of distance and where these places are in the world that we have to. They had to go crazy with the open world here and completely do it. And that is great. They had to get the stupid buggy in, they had the boat ship in and all that stuff. So I get why they did it. And being the second part of a game, it gave them development time to do it, right? Because the first game was already built out, there's a lot of things they didn't have to worry about as compared to building a game from scratch. They've built a game before, so the engine is rolling, the team knows how to make a game and put it together, and they know it works. So time to build out this incredible large world with tons and tons and tons of things to do. So 16 is overall story is well better paced, but you don't really feel like you're going on this long journey compared to 7, where you very much, that is the whole point of this chapter, is that you feel like you're going on this incredibly long journey through this massive world. But due to open world progress and design, story pacing can vary wildly, and everyone's gonna have their different opinions on this, because you either care about doing everything, nothing, or you did a little bit as much as you liked and whatnot. I land in the camp of I did every fucking thing and I beat the game and it took 100 hours, because I did literally everything. Filled every little dot, because number go up, big number feel good. So in conclusion, with world design, I'm really hesitant for Square Enix to ever really do an open world again. After 15 and this, we kind of just don't really fucking need it. Like, actually, like these zones, again, there's an expectation for 7, right? So there's an expectation how big these areas were in people's minds when they were going through it back in the day. So anything smaller than that would like destroy that image. But moving to the future, I hope Square Enix doesn't take the wrong thing where like, all right, it's a 20-year development cycle because we need to fucking do this again. We don't. They don't need to be that large. I really don't want them to do another open world if they just fill it with useless crap again. And I'm not talking about the written side quests. I'm talking about the little random camps of enemies and the dumb towers and scanning rocks. The hunts and the side quests are great, but you really don't need a ton of space to do that type of stuff. And I will admit 16 is a bit light on things to do, but I think it kind of gets the size right for a sensible game, right? Again, for a sensible game. 7 Rebirth is not sensible in a lot of ways. So if we're, again, designing another game, I would like to take the lessons they learned from 16, but expand it out a bit. And I think we're heading towards a better formula. Like, I really don't need these games to be 100 hours just to get to the main story. Like, I think the pacing of 16 lands it better, a 30 to 40 hour adventure. And then you can add new game plus or whatnot so you can play it again with new mechanics in the boss fights like 7 Rebirth does, and new challenges to explore. But the world just simply does not need to be as big as it is. These two games are nearly polar opposites on how they approached every single design decision in their game. One game is designed to be a bit more mass market, cutting away a lot of the fat, but honestly slightly going a little too far and ripping out those RPG mechanics for mass market appeal. But what we got is some of the best action combat in the industry, and definitely for the series, that is nearly perfect, with emotional story beats and action set pieces that go so incredibly high that they could probably be considered some of the best in video games ever made. The other game is a celebration of the original release for its fans, filling in extra parts and adding scenes, expanding on the party's emotional state and friendship throughout the journey, and doubling down on it, knowing that most of its emotional beats and goofiness will land due to the success of its predecessor. There are practically no games out there, or very few, that can play a few notes of the song and instantly warp me back 2 decades. When that Cosmo Canyon theme played, I bawled like a little bitch. I cried so hard. And that is just so unfair to other games, but also a testament to how just what a revival this game pulled off. There is simply absolutely nothing like it, but it being a celebration from something in the past alienates new fans. Sure, new people will come into the franchise and try it, but you have to be honest with yourself. This game is very much made for people who played the original game, and a lot is going to be lost on them. I have many accounts of people who just bounced off because they just don't connect to the characters like we do, because we have like this whole history behind them. Yeah, man, we would follow them to the ends of the earth. In between these two titles is where I believe the franchise should head in the future. I agree that the Final Fantasy franchise needs to stop reinventing the wheel every single sequel, and they need to set a foundation. And I feel like 17 can be that foundation. Now that we've seen both extremes, right? All the way to turn-based and all the way to pretty much complete action. We have seen both ends now. And then we have 7 Rebirth complementing at that pretty much being in between those two. In order for the series to continue, it has to appeal to old fans and newcomers alike. If they truly want to keep overall quality as high as it is, these games need to sell a lot for what they're putting out. When we talk about story, as long as the team has a strong vision and is able to tell their story in a compelling way, they can pretty much do anything they want. As we've seen both ends now, complete goofiness and very serious. E for everyone and completely mature. And anything in the future goes at this point. There's no longer that fear or hesitance. It's like, can we do this or not? It's all been done now. And find your footing. Game loop wise, I think 16 was overall in the right direction, but missed the mark slightly. Its successor should re-add those RPG elements that were stripped down from the game. And even if the next party of characters is a small number, as it was in 16's case, learn from it. 16's RPG feel would have vastly improved if we could kid out Torgal and Jill just a bit and able to issue commands every now and then, with learning from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's ATB system. Adding that system and merging the two would have made this really compelling thing and would make you feel like you were still in a party and not just like this one-man army. And character swapping would be a treat as well. I think that is something that any future title should focus on, being able to swap between characters and give commands. I don't need every character to have the depth of Clive, right? And not a whole game's worth of depth. Spread it out between your party members and switch between them. And even if they don't have party switching, look at Dragon's Dogma 2 on how you can design combat and it still be an action combat and have party members still feel useful and feel like you're an RPG with buffs, debuffs, CCs, assists when you get knocked down, they walk by and pick you up, or they catch you when you're falling, or they add fire to your attacks whenever there's a certain enemy type. There is a way to design an action game but still have that depth of RPG that the 7 Rebirth in itself shows as well. And exploration and side questing, other than building out the world as well, should feed back into your progression, giving you weapons, abilities, XP, money, accessories, with optional challenges for us that want to test our ability and test the systems of the game. One of 16's most glaring failures is that it did not have a more difficult mode, and for those who've played action games before, we felt like the game was incredibly easy. And I understand newcomers to action felt it was just fine, but give people options and things to aspire to. As RPG players, that's the thing we love most, is building out our characters, our party, our power and synergies to fight the hardest thing so we can get that ridiculous item that we're never going to use because we already beat everything in the game. But it'll be real cool when we use Knights of the Round and one-shots everything, and I'll make a clip out of it, right? But we love that bullshit. World design wise, again, the franchise has seen both sides of the spectrum, with completely linear Final Fantasy XIII and 7 Remake to the very extremely open 15 and 7 Rebirth. We have seen both extreme sides of the spectrum at this point, and where we need to come to is in the middle. And 16 again was almost there, just missed the mark slightly. And I believe 12 is something we need to look back on and have these pretty large and really large interconnected zones. In a Final Fantasy game, we do want to travel the world, right? We want to see a ton of different biomes. But I understand development wise, that costs money and time to make new art assets and land masses for very different looking areas. So bring the scope in. We don't need 7 Rebirth sized areas. I think actually Nibelheim is probably the size of area I'm looking for most areas. It's a lot smaller than the rest if you cut out the water part, and the actual landmass and area you're traveling is like pretty decent size. And I would say like, yeah, that's probably kind of what I'm looking for most of these types of games, if not slightly larger. As really again, Final Fantasy VII's Rebirth size is an anomaly because It is the second iteration of a trilogy. They built out the base game and they gave them time, development tools, and funding to build out this next part and make it incredibly massive. And now that they've made this part, I bet 3 will be a lot easier to make as well, because they've done it before and they know what works, right? And as you'll see, like, each of these games is going to improve on what came prior to it. I imagine the third part of this iteration is going to be fucking massive. And I am terrified, honestly. But again, it is an anomaly. And for the sake of development time and how long these games come out, and really the size of the games, they don't need to be that big, actually. So again, really in that scope of it, I think it's going to be a very, very long time before we ever see a game the size of Rebirth again. And let's not forget, one of 16's greatest qualities is that it was announced, then released in like 2 years. The development of the game was like 5 years or so, 5 to 6 years, something like that. But the game was like pretty much like mostly done at the time of announcement in the game, and they had 2 years to finish it out. That was sadly uncommon with the Final Fantasy franchise at that point, because there were so many history delays and rebuildings of various games and restarts that development has been troubled with the series for quite a long time. And it's incredible that 16 was announced and came out. The 7 Remake series also had a lot of development issues, as they gave it to one team originally, then completely brought it in-house. And that took time, and that's why 7 Remake is the way it is. Very small in scope, but the story scope and what it's laying out there quality-wise is what carries it. The combat and story. But if you play Remake again, I mean, just look at the maps, look at how they're reusing everything for quests and even main story quests. There's a lot of filler and fluff to pad out the game. Everyone knows Remake's problems, but it's still a quality experience overall. But its trials and tribulations helped to make Final Fantasy Rebirth the juggernaut it is today. I'm honestly excited to see what Square Enix goes with in the future. And as long as they're able to show their willingness to listen, their sense of determination, and confidence and vision, I'm down to try out whatever they put out. Let me know if you agree, disagree, leave a comment below, keep it civil, and I'll see you on the next random drop video. Peace.